All right, so I am here with Denis Ledoux from the Memoir Network. And Denis, today, I appreciate you being here. Today, he is going to be sharing with you the 10 things that you really need to do to get your book right. So I'm going to hand it over to Denis. You are based in Maine. I appreciate you being here so much, and I'm excited to hear what you have to share.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you. I've been working with people to write memoirs now for a long time, so I've done a lot of thinking about what makes some people do it more easily and more interestingly. And so this afternoon as we're speaking, I don't know when it is that people are listening to us, but these are things that people can do that'll just ease the writing process of a memoir.
Perfect.
And the first thing that I would say is to write a memory list. The memory list is, as you'd guess, it is a list of everything about your life or a period of your life that you can remember. So it can have big items like my mother died when I was 6, or it can have really little items like I had stagecoach wallpaper when I was a kid. So there's big, those are little. And what happens when you do this memory list is that it unlocks memory after memory. In my workshops, people will say, I will say to them, write at least 100 by tomorrow, and 200 is even better. And they say, you've got to be kidding. And they go home, they go to wherever they're going to, and they produce 200, 300. And they say to me, I stayed up until midnight writing these lists. They kept coming. And if you think that the role of the unconscious is to keep things unconscious, so what you want to do, and the memory list does this really great, once you start remembering things, the unconscious is just like tricked into telling you more and more. And people will say, I hadn't thought of this in 50 years. And something will come up. Now, what you have to do in the memory list is to write 3 to 5 words. So it has to be long enough that in a month from now, 2 months from now, you remember something. Now, if you're all excited and you write hat on your list, 2 months from now, are you going to remember whose hat it was or which particular hat? But if you write Uncle Armand's fur hat, then of course you're going to remember that in a while. So you have to write enough to fix the memory, but you don't need sentences. You don't need to go on and on. This is not what it's about. It's only about a memory list. The memory list has this wonderful feature that when you sit down to write, oh, I can't think of what to write. What am I going to write today? Oh, I'm blank. No. You just go to your memory list and you write something. You just, Uncle Armand's fur hat, and you just write what you remember. The thing to remember about memoir writing is that in some ways, we could say, Jessica Santonato's memoir is an anthology. It is a collection of her stories. We think of memoirs, and that's my next point. I'm kind of jumping into it, but a memoir is a collection of many stories, many vignettes, many dialogues, and in your craftsmanship, you put them together. But it all starts, I think, with a memory list. When I write, I start with a memory list, and I'm always so astonished that I remember this, I remember that I had no idea that was still inside of me. Now, what this means is not only when you sit down to write tomorrow that you're set up to do something so that you're just not looking at your computer screen and saying, I can't think of a thing. You write 25 words or you write 2,500 words. You just use the list to help you. Sometimes the list will give you just a little detail. Like I was in my room with the green stagecoach wallpaper. That's just a little detail. It's something very small. And yet, when the reader reads it, the reader is in the room with you. And that's what you want to get away from abstract. And that's going to be concrete details. It is going to be one of the things that I think we need to include in a memoir. The memory list, before I leave the memory list, I'm just going to repeat, it's everything that you can remember. There's no judgment. Oh, is it important enough? It's not important enough. No, don't waste your time on that. Put it down. You'll find some use for it someplace in your memoir. The next thing is you want to write 3 to 5 words. And then the thing after that you want to do is to just keep that non-judgmental thing going and go for volume, because after a while, volume, your guard starts to slip. And by the time you get to the 100th, you're kind of going for it, and you're like going wild, and you're just writing things down. And sometimes you get to things that surprise you, like, I always hated it when my mother said blah blah blah, and you kind of forgot that, but you feel visceral. And that's the thing that you want to keep in mind when you write a memoir, is that visceral feeling that, that's true. That is what you have to write about, because we all write things from our head. That's where we start. My mother was a saint. My father was my hero. Okay, we know that stuff. Now, as you continue to write, it occurs to you, I hated it when my mother said that to me. Our saint now is no longer the saint. Now, the memoir is not a place to throw stones. That's not what I'm saying. But if you're writing stick characters, my mother the saint, my father the hero, it's like, give me a break. Your father, your mother, as sweet and as wonderful as they were, as sweet, as wonderful as we are as parents, we do have a few faults. And when you put the faults in, they help us to understand something about them, but also about you, about how you were with them and how you reacted to them and why you reacted that way. So that's really pretty essential. So that's the memory list. I hope that nobody listening to this will say, oh, I don't think I'll do it. No, do it. You'll be so happy that you did it. Once you do the memory list, that writer's block that people complain about, phony baloney. You'll never have a writer's block after you've done a memory list. You may not want to write about something, but that's not the same thing as a writer's block. The next thing that I would say to people writing their memoirs, and we get all kinds of people here, I'm presuming, listening to this, is that as you do your memory list, check the 10 most important memories. For instance, your mother dying when you were 6. That's probably a pretty big one. So write about that one. And I always feel that if you run out of energy, or if you run out of time, and the Grim Reaper comes, we know not when it comes. And so you have your most important stories written. I've been at this work for several decades now, and I've had clients who have died on me. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's always so sad, because one man who got sick, and he said, I know it's my fault, I kept putting it off. So, okay, write your most important stories. Identify which are your 10 most important stories, and then write them. And then you're going to put them in a 3-ring binder. I love printing things out. And I know that in a digital age, you can have them all on your computer. But I think if you print them out and you can just go through them and you say, wow, I've written, 10 6-page stories is already 60 pages. It makes you feel good. Because I always tell people, my first book, which was Turning Memories into a Memoir, my first really long book, it's 275 pages. Well, it's not really long, but it's long. And long. If you had said to me, write 275 pages, I'd have said, you got to be nuts. I've got a life to live, I've got a family, I've got kids, I can't do this. But what I did is I just sat down and I used a little psychology, and I said, oh, write about writing dialogue, write about setting, write about telling the truth, write about what the truth is. And so I just gave myself some very small tasks to do. And eventually, without ever having set out to write a 275-page book, I produced a 275-page book. So to anybody listening to this, keep writing your stories and just say, I'm writing this story. I'm writing the time I won a scholarship. I'm writing about the time that I proposed and got turned down. I'm writing in marriage. Whatever it is that you're writing about. And that's all you're writing about today. And I sometimes will say to people, can you write a 3 to 5 page story? Well, Jessica, you can write a 3 to 5 page story, and I can do it. And anybody listening to us today can write a 3 to 5 page story. And then I'll say, can you write one next week and the week after? Yeah, I can do that. So with that kind of setup, at the end of 1 year, 3 to 5 pages, you have 150 to 250 pages of a first draft. I'll admit it won't be polished. But if you give yourself the schedule, a regular schedule, and something really finite, I'm going to write about being 7 years old. I'm going to write about when my mother died. I'm going to write about when I got offered that job. Just that. One a week. At the end of 1 year, without it's having eviscerated your life, because that's what people are afraid of when they write a memoir. They're afraid that it's going to eviscerate their lives, and it doesn't have to do that. So if you start by writing your most important stories, that's my second point. Write your most important stories, and then once you've got those, just keep writing at a regular, steady pace, and eventually your stories will begin to add up. You could do it in a year. I mean, most people can write a first draft within 1 year. Then I would say, as my third point, is check your memories, because that's your memory list. Is everything true on your memory list? And so a great thing to do is to work against the memory being false. I remembered something, but it's not quite the way it was. Sometimes it's really very little. And I remember telling my wife a story about my grandfather. And I was so sure that it was true. I mean, it wasn't a big story, it was just a little story. And then the very next day, my brother came. And he said, oh, do you remember when he used to? And he told me this story. My wife is sitting right next to me. And his version was different from mine. But again, you know, that little visceral feeling that I was mentioning, when he told his story, his version, I had a visceral sense of he's right and I'm wrong. It wasn't big, but it proves, I think, that all of us are subject to false memories. And so it's important to check your memories against a diary, against journals. And I wrote my mother's memoir, which it was called We Were Not Spoiled. And as she was narrating her life, she kept saying, I got to tell you, we weren't spoiled when we were kids. So I called it We Were Not Spoiled. And I was able to go into the newspaper archives, and about her courtship with my father, I wanted dates. And she, oh, it was in the 40s. Oh, it was during the war. Well, that's not quite precise enough to write a memoir. So I went to the newspaper and I looked up, well, this was on the internet, newspaper archives on the internet. And I found all these little notes, you know, they would say, his name was Albert Ledoux. So they would say, Private First Class Albert Ledoux is reporting to such and such a base in Mississippi. He was in Biloxi, Mississippi for a while. And then it'd say, private first class, private third class, Albert Ledoux is for a furlough, and then he will be reporting to this other place. So as that was happening, I was getting data as I was recording this. So go to newspapers, go to your diaries, look at diplomas, look at photos, who is in the photo. And if you know that your uncle died in 1996, and there he is in the photo was before 1996, so you can be a sleuth. You know, Agatha Christie, you know, in her book, her detective stories, you know, the Poirot goes and he picks up a little piece on the floor and he says, very interesting. And you know very well that that's going to be how he's going to solve the mystery. And so you have to go and find all your little pieces on the floor and look at them and use them to work against your memory being false and flattering, you know, flattering. Oh, I was really young when I joined the symphony orchestra. Oh, I must have been 16. Well, actually, you were 23, that kind of thing. So it can be very flattering. People will sometimes remember things that aren't so. And it isn't quite a lie. I mean, it's not like they said, but perhaps some of them do. But I think for most people, it's just that we like to think of our past as perhaps more flattering than it can be. And it can also be defensive. That is, I said something that was really very hurtful, say to my mother or my father. And I want to say, oh yeah, well, he had it coming. Well, perhaps not. Perhaps I was just really being defensive of the fact that I was really just lazy or I was something. And so interviewing is a really great way, interviewing the people who were there. So research and interview, and I could go on, but I'm going to move on to my fourth point, which is telling the truth. And what is the truth? You know, there's Jessica's truth, and there's her sister's truth, and her brother's truth, and her mother's truth, and her father's truth, you know? And it's just really, really challenging sometimes to tell the truth. Sometimes the truth is not worth really finding, you know. For instance, you got pushed off your swing when you were 4 years old. Was it your brother Bobby or your brother Dickie who pushed you off the swing? That's not really as important. I mean, it was an accident, but what's really important is that you broke a tooth and it was painful. That's the important. So that's the truth. So some truths aren't more important than that. But other truths, did dad ever love mom? Or did she ever love him? That's something that's going to color your childhood. That's something that's going to color your sense of what relationship is and how you trust yourself, perhaps, in a relationship. That's a truth that I would explore if I were writing my memoir. So I think you have to distinguish between the truth that's worth distinguishing, worth pursuing, finding out about, and the truth that is insignificant, really, when you get down to it. There's the element too, people say to me all the time, oh, but if I say this, my sister's going to be so angry. She says it was this other way. And I always say, tell your sister to write her own memoir. Send her to me. I'll help her. It's your memoir. And I think it's honest to have a little footnote or a preface or an afterword to say, there are people in my family or my friends who feel that this is a different story than the one I have told. However, I have told the truth that is my truth. And don't be soft on yourself with, I got to tell my truth. You know, you've got to explore it. You've got to double check those memories. But once you've come to a certain point, you can tell it. But you also have the right to your privacy. So writing a memoir is not occasion for you to hurt yourself. If there are things that you really don't want to share, I would work my memoir around I don't have to tell everything, and perhaps I can skip this portion. The American biographer, memoirist, Henry Adams, in the life of Henry Adams, had a wife who was mentally ill, and she was for 20 years in a mental institution. And if you read the life of Henry Adams, he was the grandson of John Adams, the president, and great-grandson of John Quincy, and then the great-grandson of John Adams. He doesn't mention his wife. You'd think that he was a bachelor. But it was so painful to him that when asked why he didn't do it, he said, I still love who she was, and I felt disloyal doing that. So that's an example of you don't have to hurt yourself. Another thing that I would do is I would ask you all to be specific. I would ask all writers. So don't say, and this is a big thing about adjectives and adverbs. At least half of your adjectives and half of your adverbs are just sloppy writing. We were poor. Big deal. I mean, what does that mean, you were poor? A friend of mine, when she was in college, had a discussion with girls in the dorm room, and one girl said to her, well, I know you think I'm rich, but I was not rich. We couldn't afford a live-in maid. Our maid went home every night. And my friend said I could hardly open my mouth and say, rich to me was people who had always had ice cream in the refrigerator. So what do you mean by poor? What do you mean? You can say we were poor. Oh, you could say we had a tattered linoleum rug that hardly reached from the sofa to the chairs facing it. That's poor. Nobody would argue that that is poor. So eliminate half of your adjectives, eliminate half of your adverbs, and replace them with specific actions, dialogues, or settings. Like a dialogue is, and she took that plate and she threw it at me, and it whizzed by my ear and crashed against the wall in back of me. That's an angry woman. You don't have to say angry. We got it.
Yeah.
And it's really tighter writing. It's not lazy writing. And another element that I would say about writing is that you need to, and this is element number 6, you need to explore the family myths. We tried our hardest. We were poor but happy. Those are all kind of cliches and stereotypes. And the family myths are how families like to speak of themselves. And sometimes they're true. Sometimes they're really true. But sometimes they're also false and flattering and defensive, these stories that we tell. And we tell those about ourselves also. So it's not just our families, but it's about ourselves, how we want to think about ourselves. I always tried hard. Is that really true? So as you look back and you see, well, I went to an easier college because I wanted to be the big fish in the little pond. I could have gone to a tougher college. I was smart, but I was afraid of the competition. So now you know something about yourself that you perhaps had known, but didn't want to speak. So look at the myths being the interpretations that you give to your life stories. That's kind of, I've alluded to cliches and stereotypes. We always worked hard. We were a loving family. Well, the loving family one is people like to say, but when George didn't show up at a family reunion for 10 years, who reached out to him and said, George, we love you. What can we do? What can we do to make it all right for you to feel safe at our family reunion? A family that doesn't do that, I'm sorry, but you can't say that's a loving family, a family that doesn't reach out to one of its members. So you look at your large context. Does it support the cliches that you use as you describe yourself or your family? And I would also suggest to people, which I alluded to very early on, that you set up a schedule for yourself to write. If you have a dental appointment, do you break it because you want to go for a walk or because your friend called up and asked you to go up for a cup of coffee? No, you say, I can't do it now. I'm going to the dentist. And it's the same thing with your writing appointment. I'd love to go out for a cup of coffee with you, but between 8 and 10 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I write. And you've got to set a schedule for yourself and honor it. You and your memoir are worth that kind of commitment. Now, a lot of people will say to me, oh, I'd like to set up a schedule, but I just don't have time. And when I say, what do you mean you don't have time? And they'll say, oh, I know you're supposed to write for 4 or 5 hours to get the juices going. Very nice, but who among us has 4 or 5 hours? Saturday sometimes. So I say, listen, dude, if you sat down and wrote a half hour every day, you get up, you have your coffee, you take out your computer, you write for a half hour. That's 2.5 hours a week if you write 5 days a week. And over a year's time, that's 125 hours. That's 3 40-hour weeks. I'm pretty impressed. You took 3 weeks out and you went to work. Don't pass up a schedule because you can't do 5 hours at a shot. Write a half hour, 45 minutes, 1 hour. And what you find is that every once in a while, you can do an hour. You can do an hour and 20 minutes and you do it. But there are many days when you do your half hour and then you say, oh, I've got to get the kids ready for school, or I've got to go to my job, or I'm due for physical therapy or something. But it works. Over time, you can write a book at a half hour a day, if that's what you have to do. I would also encourage people, as kind of a wrap up, is I would encourage people to work within a group. So to either, sometimes you can go to your library, you can get a group. Sometimes you can get a mentor, you can get a coach, you can get a teleclass, you can do a high school writing class, a university class. And this, as we're speaking, there's the coronavirus, so it probably would be a Zoom class that you would be attending. But once, we're not going to be in this, I hope, forever. Life will life will resume. So find yourself a group, a coach, a mentor, somebody to work with. And then lastly, once you've written your book and it's published, whether it's published by a publisher or you do it independent publishing, throw yourself a party. Invite your friends over. You can, I've seen people do this, and it's just fun. I mean, one woman, it was like a wedding. She invited like 300 people. And wow. It was, she had a buffet. It was just the most wonderful. And, you know, I think she sold something like 150 books. It was incredible. I guess people felt really guilty that they were on her largesse, but it was so much fun. I went to another one, which was slightly smaller. I would say there was probably 200 people, but it was also catered, and it was in a museum. So the man it came from a town, and he was a businessman, and the museum was devoted to work in that community and to work life. And so they said, sure, we'd love to host a launch. And so it went there. And I've known people who've invited, one of my clients just simply had a party at his house. And you know, there were a lot of people. And when I invited me, of course, and I went, of course. And it was fun. It was fun. So my last thing is celebrate your achievement, because you can do it. Everybody listening to this can do it. Don't, you know, it's not necessarily that you're going to win the Nobel Prize for your memoir, but hey,
yeah, I
would have loved to have had my grandparents' memoir, even if it hadn't won the Nobel Prize. So in a nutshell, kind of a sprint here, which I sometimes do this in a workshop that lasts for 25 hours, but here we go in a half hour or so.
No, I so appreciate everything you shared. Every tip was fantastic. And I was thinking about my memoir process when I wrote back, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. Or, oh yeah, I remember struggling with this. And even just the like wanting to write because it was a day to write, but I didn't have the energy to do so. And like, oh, so I know that everything you shared will help the process seem less daunting, because I know some people can approach a book and be like, oh my gosh, it's too much to write a book. But breaking it down in chunks, like the different things that you said, like having the specific, you know, times to write, you know, even the memory list, like going back to there, because so many people say like, I don't know what to write anymore, right? They're just like at a standstill.
Yes.
So,
and I'll say to them, oh, my dear, have you done your memory list? And he or she will say, oh, I didn't do the memory list. I was like, go home
There
and do
you
your
go.
memory list.
Well, Denise, this is awesome. I would love for you to share, like, what are the different services? How do you help people in their memoir journey?
Well, first of all, I'm going to give the name of our site. It is the
Sure.
Memoir Network, TheMemoir Network.com. And we have a blog, and a blog has 500 posts. So I would say to people, go to the blog, look up the categories, choose the categories that you need the most work in. So that's a deliberate practice in where you feel you're the weakest, and read the posts that we have, do the action steps, and that will move you along. We offer a lot of books. We have a class called a teleclass. It's a online learning. Actually, you can do it without any contact, and you just download it, or you can do it with a monthly call. That's called Write Your First Memoir Draft, and that can be very useful. We also offer coaching and editing. So coaching is really very interactive, and really we work with writers to work through their blocks to establish a culture of writing, because when you write, you're a writer. And if you were studying plumbing, the master plumber would say, well, you need these tools and you need this approach. And when you have a problem, you've got to approach it this way. I mean, there are ways that work better, and coaching really works with that. And then once somebody has a manuscript, we do editing. We also do ghost writing. So sometimes people will just say, it's just too much. I'd like to, write something rough and then have you polish it. Or sometimes we'll do the whole thing. And then we also do book production. So sometimes a lot of our people, really want to publish 200 to 500 copies of their book. And we really do specialize in the first-time writer and the only-time writer. So our site lists that, for the first time and only time writer. And, our people oftentimes might write a second book, but they're not people who are establishing themselves as writers who are going to go on into a career.
Sure.
And so we really understand those people, and we understand that they need the support.
And for those of you that are listening, I really encourage you to go to Denis, go to the Memoir Network for resources, and to work with somebody who specializes in memoirs, because it's so much easier than trying to navigate everything on your own, and then trying to find like an editor over here and then something. Like, go to someone that really specializes in it, because it'll make the process so much easier. And Denis, I love that you said about first-time writers and the only writer. It's kind of like this, which is true for a lot of memoir writers, but also what I'm hearing in that is getting it done right the first time.
Yes.
Like you that level of quality, what I'm hearing is there for you. Like, you want people to pump out quality books, so they're not returning, in 2 years, 5 years, going like, oh, it was, that was kind of like a practice round. Like, here's my final version.
Yes, and people have sent us a book and they say, well, this is the book that I published 2 years ago. Do you want to work with me? I'm not proud of it. And I always say, when we're through, you are going to be proud of the book that you created with us.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. And so you have the website, thememoirnetwork.com, and is there another contact that they can reach you at?
Well, Denis, DENIS, at thememoirnetwork.com. And we have a 28 lesson, it's free. We have a 28 lesson sequence that comes every other week. And that's our free membership. So I would suggest that you sign up for the free membership, you get those 28 lessons, and there's really a lot in there. Some people write back to me and say, I used those and that was enough, and I wrote my book, and wonderful.
Oh, beautiful.
Wonderful. I think the world is a better world when people write their memoirs.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, this is so beautiful. I'm so glad that we connected. Thank you so much for sharing this wisdom. You know, like you said, you've been doing this for decades. So for you to share it, it means a lot.
Well, it's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Jenny. We'll reconnect soon.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.